Hello, welcome everyone. We're going to give everybody just a couple of minutes here, or about a minute, just to come and get into the room so we can get started. But if you could, please let us know who you are, where you're from, what organization you're with. We would love to hear from you. And then Stephanie will kick it off here in just about a minute. Great.
Asna is here from the ASPCA.
Hey,
Yay, welcome. They teach a lot of our vet students how to do spay and neuter, so we appreciate them.
absolutely. All right, Stephanie, I think we can actually go ahead and get started. So.
All right, great. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today as we release Shelter Animals Count's latest data report, Unaltered Trends and a National Look at Sterilization Rates and Shelter Impact. This report marks the first national level analysis of animal level sterilization data in our field, powered by more than 5 years of monthly intake data from hundreds of organizations across the country. Our data team analyzed animal level data from 2019 to 2023, and we'll dive into a sample of that data here in a bit. We're also really excited to welcome Dr. Julie Levy to today's conversation. She'll present insights from her latest studies on post-pandemic sterilization gap, providing critical context on how the pandemic exacerbated surgical shortfalls and what we can do now to catch up. So what we found in this report is both significant and concerning, as you'll hear today. Fewer animals are arriving at shelters already altered, and this trend has implications for shelter capacity, length of stay, and ultimately life-saving outcomes. But today's presentation is more than just about numbers. It's about what those numbers reveal and changing community access to spay-neuter services, shifting shelter resources, and the urgent need to rebuild veterinary capacity. So while the report presents some alarming trends, our hope is with this conversation today, we can open up the dialogue about where we are as an industry and where do we go from here. So we're proud to offer this level of insight to the field and even more committed to working alongside our partners to drive solutions rooted in data, collaboration, and action. So thank you for being a part of this critical conversation and for being here today. And I'll hand it over to Tori.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Tori Fugate. I'm the Director of Communications for Shelter Animals Count. We're very happy that you're all here today. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things before we dive into the presentation. So for those that are joining us, it will be recorded. We will be posting the recording of this on our YouTube page, on our website, and on social channels in the following days. So we'll get that up as quick as we can. You're going to see throughout the presentation that there is going to be some links shared in the deck today. We will put all of those in the recap so that you'll be able to access any links that we're referring to. There will also be, you can absolutely put things in the chat if you have any questions. We also have the Q&A open, and I wanted to mention that our data team is in the presentation as well today. So if you have specific data questions, please feel free to ask those. We'll do our best to get those answered and address any questions that come up. We're going to ask a few questions of you today because we want to hear from you and hear what's working well in your communities, what's working well at your shelters, your rescues, your organizations, what's impacting pets currently in your communities. And so we would love to hear from you. As Stephanie mentioned, some of the data today that we're going to talk about is challenging data to hear, and will present us with this like, okay, what do we do now sort of mentality. So we want to hear what's working well, but we also want to hear from you. And then I want to go ahead and introduce Dr. Julie Levy, who is no stranger at all to this conversation in this field. We're so excited that she's here today to present insights from her latest studies on the post-pandemic pet sterilization gap, providing critical context to how the pandemic exacerbated surgical shortfalls and what we can do now to catch up. And then after that, we'll dive into our report itself. Then we'll have some Q&A with Dr. Levy after that before we wrap up today's webinar. So thank you, Dr. Levy, for being here. I'm going to go ahead and let you get started.
Thank you, Tori. Yeah, this is a challenging time. We were talking a little bit before we started about like, where's the good news? When is this going to turn around? And we're like, I'm not sure. So it's really critical when we face these big challenges, especially when they're industry-wide, to take a good look at data, find out what the evidence is telling us, and then really be willing to step back and challenge our current procedures and assumptions and make new solutions when we have to, because spay neuter is so critical. And as you will see from multiple studies that have been done, there's a shortage of veterinarians that are doing it. The clinics are closing or they are reducing the capacity that they have. And we are also seeing higher numbers of animals coming into shelters, or demand for shelters to take in more animals when they are in crisis nationwide, with crowding and with reduced adoptions, especially for the big dogs. And we will be kind of hitting back on that big dog problem, and also free roaming cats as targets that we have to keep in mind as we go forward and figure out how to use what is becoming a pretty limited resource of spay neuter. I love this picture because this is from Peggy Adams Animal Rescue League. 3 times a year, we go down there with our students and interns, and they do a TNR spay neuter day for about 600 cats in one day. And we have another one coming up this weekend, so we're really looking forward to that. So the first alarm about this in the shelter world was really raised by the San Francisco SPCA and UC Davis. They did a survey of all the California shelters and asked them about how their workforce was doing in terms of, are all their positions for veterinarians and veterinary technicians and staff filled? And what we found was that over 2/3 of them were unable to consistently fill those jobs, and therefore they had major gaps in care, including even, just the basics, not having enough people to vaccinate to prevent disease or to provide humane euthanasia in a timely manner, let alone anything more extravagant like spay neuter. And this was widespread across the state. Over half of their positions for veterinarians in California shelters remain unfilled. Okay. So we then looked at data from spay neuter clinics post-pandemic. And so we were able to work with Clinic HQ, which is software that manages spay neuter practice. And so those are usually the higher volume clinics. We use Clinic HQ, and we reached out and we found over 200 clinics that had data, complete data from 2019, before the pandemic started, for the next 2 years. And we just looked at what their kind of recovery was post-pandemic. And it was rough getting that data. So in 2019, a lot of these are clinics that were opened with the assistance of ASNA, the ASPCA spay neuter program. So they were really robust and they were growing every year. And in 2019, they were on track to grow by 3% in the next year. So we expected growth, but instead we had the pandemic, which we expected the shutdown. So I dropped for a few months for the shutdown, but then they should have just recovered, gone back to work, and got back to that at least as good as 2019, maybe even getting that 3% growth. Instead, what we found was 8 clinics could not reopen, and or 8 clinics temporarily closed, and then 4 clinics never reopened, and 2 clinics actually stopped doing spay neuter and just became full-time wellness preventive medicine clinics. And together, these almost 200,000 fewer surgeries were performed in those clinics than would have been had they done their 2019 data. So that's huge, 200,000. And if you project that to the 300,000 the 3,000 spay neuter clinics in the US, we predicted at that time that there was a shortfall of 2.7 million surgeries that had not been performed as planned. And we knew before the pandemic, we were still working on needing to scale up. So next slide. So this is what the chart looks like. The green one is our baseline, that's 2019, and then red is our pandemic year. And so you see that abrupt drop in the spring for a few months, but then it bounces back, but it does not get back to the 2019 level. And similarly for 2021, although it kind of wobbles up back and forth around those lines, it did not recover total number of surgeries. So next slide. So we wanted to follow up again. We just repeated the same study with the same clinics, hoping that we'd say, okay, finally they would recover. And they actually performed fewer surgeries than in 2021. So things were getting more grim, not better. 6 clinics were no longer providing any surgery. 28 had temporarily closed, longer than the pandemic. They just lost all their staff and they couldn't open again. And in the bottom line was only 161 of those 212 clinics were still open for surgery in 2023. So we did that projection again for if all 3,000 spay neuter clinics were experiencing a similar trend. We now have a projected shortfall of 3.7 million surgeries that were not done. And now we're years down the line. So this isn't even counting the offspring of those animals having their own litters and then having more litters, that compounding effect of when you drop spay neuter numbers over years. Next slide. So this is what the long range chart looks like. You see the big drop. You see, first of all, in 2019, things were going up. And then you see the big drop in 2020 spring for a shutdown, and then just never getting back to that baseline all the way through the first half of 2023. Next slide. So we also surveyed with Petco their clinics that they support. And so we had a group of spay neuter clinics, access to care clinics, and then we also had shelters that were doing their own clinics for their own animals. And what we found in this survey is that 3/4 of them had open positions for veterinarians and veterinary support staff. So that's huge when 3 out of 4 clinics have budgets for people and plans to do spay neuter and can't fill them. That means that 79% of these access to care clinics reported that their wait time for appointments for surgeries had gone on much longer, and over half had wait times of 2 months. And we know that a wait time of 2 months in an intact adult animal might be too late, and they might have a litter, especially cats. And then in the clinics, in the shelters, 91% of the shelters reported that they had a backlog of spay neuter that was contributing to delays in crowding in their shelter. And that added up to, in these surveyed places, up to 20,000 animals awaiting surgery in these clinics. So next slide. So that brings us back to why is this going on? Why are all the positions open? Why can't we fill them? And there's a very huge amount of reasons for that. It's happening in private practice as well, but it's more severe in the nonprofit sector. But I encourage you to check out this map. It's the Veterinary Care Accessibility Project, and they looked at every county in the US and looked at veterinary staffing, both for support staff and for veterinarians, and then created a metric so you could determine what was the accessibility in that county. And so the red counties in here are the ones that maybe have no vets in their county or just a few. And you can look at your state or just your region and figure out how depleted your area is of veterinary care in general. These are called veterinary care deserts. Next slide. And we also know that the cost of veterinary care is increasing. And what we see from data from private practices across the country is for every increase in veterinary costs that we're observing right now, there is a matching decrease in the number of appointments that are coming in. So every time costs increase, there's another layer of families that can no longer afford to get regular veterinary care. And it's not just low-income families. It's also, creeping up into higher income families. This cost of veterinary care is also the leading reason that people are holding off on getting new pets. And so that is impacting our shelters as people say, I'm going to hold off. The cost is high and I'm not sure I can afford a pet. Next slide. So this is great. Just today, I discovered this new report. It's on the American Animal Welfare Association website, but it's a report from Hills. It's very extensive compilation of what's going on in shelters right now. So they have surveys of people and of looking at shelter data, including some of the SAC data. And for last year, 5.8 million cats and dogs were admitted to shelters, And for the 5th consecutive year, intakes exceed outcomes. And we know that when intakes exceed outcomes, you have crowding, right? There's more animals in the shelter, which leads to a very vicious cycle of long length of stay, shelter crowding, stress, and disease. And now you have your staff dealing with those negative things and not the healthy animals and getting them out into foster homes and getting them adopted. This affects large dogs the most, and we're gonna, like, I keep touching on that large dogs are the population most in crisis, in addition to neonatal kittens. They're the ones that are really suffering in shelters right now. People are new adopters, younger adopters are saying they're really going for cats. So yay, finally, cats are in the lead and having better outcomes. They want small dogs, and they are reluctant to adopt big dogs for a lot of reasons. There may be housing limits where they live, where they can't have a big dog. They want to travel. It's hard to travel with a big dog, just for reasons, but we're definitely seeing that trend against the big dogs. Go ahead. So these are some snapshots from that report. It just shows you a survey of Americans of what kind of pet people are looking for there on the left. And you see that the large dogs, only 25% of adopters are considering them. Small dogs are higher, cats are higher, and then medium dogs too. But we also look, this is really important, is where are people getting their pets? A lot of people say they intend to adopt from a shelter, but the intention and the actually outcome often don't match. And so what we see is the leading way that people got pets in this survey was from a family or friend. And that's actually a good thing, because maybe people are doing self-rehoming and not involving the shelter. And we are encouraging that through a lot of online programs, so that we don't have to take an animal into a scary place. They just get replaced. Hopefully they're getting the vet care they need and spay neuter. So we need that public access to spay neuter for that. But this is actually a good sign. But we'll look at how few animals are coming from shelters. 24% of dogs, 16% of cats. Like, we are not even like the major provider of sterilized animals, because there's so many other ways that people are getting their care. So we do need to do a better job of making shelters the place you think of first, the easiest place to get an animal and to get a healthy animal. Next slide. And this is some data that we looked at that comes from VetSource, and we had a grant from PetSmart Charities to collect this data. VetSource collects business data from veterinary clinics across the country. And in this, we wanted again to say what was happening with spay neuter in private practice in 2019 before the pandemic, and has it changed? Like, has it gone down? Has it gone up? Are they picking up the slack for the gaps that the nonprofits have? Or are they also falling, which is what we hear from a lot of rescue groups, that they can't get in to get their pets neutered. And so this is data from 4,000 practices across the country, their spay neuter data, and the bars are the average number of spay and neuter that are done every month for per practice. And so each practice is on average doing 14 spay neuter surgeries a month. That seems kind of low to me. We need to, like, there's room to grow that if they want to. But we also see that orange line is the zero, like what the baseline was from 2019. And then you can see that year over year, that green line is kind of wobbling across it. But what you can definitely say is spay neuter in private practice has not increased in order to make up for the loss in the nonprofit clinics. So we're still left with this big deficit that's causing so much trouble. Next slide. And this is a really important one, because this is something we can actually take action on. So of those 4,000 clinics, they spayed and neutered 5 million cats over that period from 2019 to 2024. 5 million cats at 4,000 clinics. So this is very representative of private practice. And so what I showed in here is the age at which the cats were spayed and neutered. And you can see there's a big peak around 6 months, which is a really traditional time for spay and neuter. It is long after the time that cats are going into heat and can get pregnant. So staying with this traditional age to spay and neuter cats is really letting a lot of oops litters or community cats reproduce before they are neutered. Our goal is to have them all sterilized by 5 months. And the United Spay Alliance has this really good campaign called Fix by 5, and they're encouraging private practices to sign on to that. it is endorsed by the AVMA and all of the big veterinary organizations. So we have a lot of work to do, and we can start really insisting that our animals get neutered by 5 months. There's really no reason. And once vets become comfortable with those small animals, they really will desire to do more pediatrics because it's easier and they recover faster. Next slide. So I'll leave you with these thoughts before we look at what the SAC data is telling us about what's happening on the shelter side, is that we have to accept that spay neuter capacity is shrinking. I think that all the evidence is it is getting worse, at least in the nonprofit sector. And I don't see like a reason it should turn around at this time if it hasn't already. Definitely the cost of veterinary is increasing. That's a part of that is because of the just cost of goods is increasing, but also there's a lot of private equity firms that are buying clinics. So it's another layer of profit that has to be accounted for. Families are facing more and more barriers to keeping their pets. So pressure on shelters is very high, and that definitely the demand for shelter intake exceeds their capacity. So how can they balance that with the need to sterilize animals for the public or for their own animals? And really, like if you haven't heard yet, shelters are in crisis nationwide. There are no shelters that are coping with their demands right now. And so be thinking about what can we do differently? And if you want to type in the chat even like, what can we really do differently that's different than what we've tried before to mitigate the harm? And I chose the word mitigate for a reason. It means to sort of reduce. It doesn't mean solve. I don't think we have solutions in front of us right now, but how can we go for harm reduction? So I would love to hear the really tactical ideas that you have in the chat. With that, I'll turn it over to Tori.
Thank you, Dr. Levy. The information is just, you've been working on this for so many years, and I can't tell you how often I referred to the study that you did around, COVID and the veterinary clinics and the reduction of surgeries that happened during that time. And because it's really important that we look at this, from a broad perspective. It's happening all across the country. It's happening in our communities, and it's impacting our shelters. It's impacting the people who are pet owners. So the information that you presented today is so incredibly valuable to this conversation, and just really puts this into perspective of what we're going to talk about with our data report that we just put out. And so we're going to bring back Dr. Levy here in just a little bit so we can have a little bit more dialogue around some of these questions and answers of how do we bounce back from this. But I want to ask a question, and if you could, if you want to put these in the chat, just be kind of thinking about it. Like, what are the biggest challenges your community faces around spay and neuter? Like, is it not enough low-cost resources? Are vet clinics have reduced services or are closed? It's too expensive. Like, what are some of the things that you're hearing? If you work in a shelter, what are things that you're hearing from the community that, maybe be impacting why pets are not spayed and neutered? So would just love to hear that, because it just helps us be able to understand, what everybody is hearing and facing in their communities today. That would be so incredibly helpful. And we are going to go ahead and dive into our altered status data report. So this is available on our website. We'll put a link in the chat to the report itself if you have not seen it. We're incredibly proud of this report. It's, the first of its kind really for our industry. And this was, we analyzed data, our data team pulled data, and we analyzed animal level data from 2019 through 2023 and looked at trends in animal sterilization when they come in at intake. So in this sample overview of what was analyzed in this report, we had 262 organizations that were included that all contributed monthly data from January 2019 through December of 2023. So those are the years that we're looking at. Sample included first intake only for each unique dog and cat. So if an animal came in a couple times, then that was excluded from the survey. So each unique first intake only. Sample includes 153 government-run shelters, 83 private shelters, as well as 26 rescue groups. And we had great representation from all over the United States. We had insufficient data for North Dakota, Utah, and Wyoming, as well as Washington, D.C., but 47 states were represented. So we had a great, group of states or like across the country represented in this report. Dogs and cats were analyzed separately in it, and it represents 2.2 million dogs and cats that are analyzed in this report. We did not exclude any organization type from this analysis, and we did not exclude any animal age group. So we recognize that puppies and kittens may be outliers in this that could impact some of this data, but we did not exclude any age groups from this. And because the report is available for you to see on your own, we're just going to go over a very high level of some of the data that was presented so that we can continue our conversation, just talking about kind of what is next for this topic. So, but the national findings, along with what Dr. Levy said, it's just, what's happening out in the community is reflective of what's happening in the shelter. We are seeing a decline across the board. Animals altered and intake continues to decrease over the years. So when we looked at 2019, that was sort of our baseline data. I remember I was working in a shelter in 2019. We kind of felt like there was like momentum in our industry. We were like in a good spot. Spay neuter was happening, like the shelters, we were full, we were experiencing a lot of animals coming in, transport was happening, but like that's sort of our baseline data. Then the pandemic hit and everything shifted. And we've never really bounced back to where we were in 2019. And now with the data that SAC has analyzed over the past, 5 years since the pandemic, we've sort of hit this new normal. The data that we keep reporting is very consistent year over year. And so this is sort of our new normal. So we kind of have to look at, okay, how do we even get back to that 2019 point? But when we look at 2019 data, dogs that were pre-altered at intake, they've dropped 10.9 percentage points compared to where we ended the study in 2023. While cats dropped less, it was 5.9 percentage points, but they still dropped overall. And then when we broke down by intake type, so we looked at owner surrender versus strays, and there was a pretty big difference between dogs that were coming in at intake that were pre-altered at intake with owner surrendered pets versus stray animals, stray dogs that came in. And so, but each year, year over year, those numbers continue to drop. So stray dogs are less likely to be altered at intake than owner surrendered pets. Owner surrendered dogs dropped by 10.7 percentage points from 2019 to 2023, while stray dogs dropped by 8.7. So pretty significant decrease there. Cats, same story. Owner surrendered cats are more likely to be owner surrendered to be pre-altered versus stray cats. That owner surrendered cats dropped by 9.6%, while stray cats dropped by 3.6% from 2019 through 2023. You can see the stray numbers didn't fluctuate as much as the owner surrendered numbers did as well. Then we broke it down by dogs versus cats. So we looked at dog level analysis, altered status by size. And this was pretty interesting to me whenever we pulled this data, that it showed that large dogs are more likely to be altered than medium and small dogs. And again, we look at puppies could factor into this because puppies are considered a lot of times as small animals whenever they come in, they're smaller. That could be factoring into this. But I just thought that was very significant that large dogs are more likely to be altered than medium and small dogs, though that gap did close significantly over the years. They all decreased over the past 5 years, and large dogs saw the largest decrease. So Dr. Levy was mentioning that we have to focus on large dogs. We're going to talk a lot about that today. Like the focus on large dogs is significant because we do see a lot of challenges with large dogs as a whole. Their length of stay is increasing. They have a harder time getting into homes. Then we looked at median length of stay to adoption over the past 5 years in the study. So pre-altered dogs consistently had a shorter median length of stay. This trend holds steady across all intake types for stray and owner surrender. So it was steady throughout. Altered animals in intake are more likely to move through the shelter faster is the implication in this. Again, stray hold could be a factor in this, but overall, dogs that are coming in that are not pre-altered as strays and owner surrenders are staying in shelters longer than those that come in pre-altered. Cats, this was a similar story. The gap was a little bit wider with cats. And again, kittens could be a factor into this. They can impact length of stay because kittens do stay in shelters longer they're in foster homes, things like that. They spend more time in the shelter, so that could be impacted in this year. But it was a very similar findings. Pre-altered cats consistently had a shorter median length of stay, and the stays were consistent across intake types, both as strays and owner surrenders. And then I wanted to ask a question as well at this time. So, what would you say is impacting length of stay? If you're in a shelter, you're in a rescue, like what are the factors that are impacting why animals are staying in your shelters longer? Or your rescues? Is it because surgery schedules are impacting, like you don't have enough veterinary resources to be able to get animals spayed and neutered before they are going out? Are you seeing adoptions that are decreasing? Not as many people are coming in that are interested in adopting pets. Just curious, like what are the reasons that you're seeing that animals are staying in shelters longer? When we put out our 2024 report, with our annual statistics, we did note that dogs' median length of stay, which by the way is when we've talked about median length of stay, we're this whole time it is median, not average. And but when we put that report out, we did note that length of stay has increased for dogs of all sizes, almost doubled by all sizes compared to 2019. So they are staying in shelters longer, which can exacerbate a lot of the capacity issues that we're seeing in shelters. Thank you so much for submitting all of this. This is so helpful to see all of this. And then lastly, before we dive into some questions, we wanted to look at percent pre-altered in intake by sex. So we looked at males versus females. And again, the findings here were really interesting to look at. So in 2023, when we ended this study, 21% of female dogs were pre-altered at intake versus 24% of male dogs. So male dogs are more likely to be pre-altered than female, which working in a shelter for as long as I did, it was a challenge sometimes to even, be able to get female dogs, especially large dogs, spayed and neutered. We had a lot of vets who maybe had, reservations about doing it, but just overall the surgeries are harder to do for females. And so this was really just looking at this data. We were like, oh, okay, so that does make sense why male dogs could potentially be more be pre-altered more than female dogs. And when we looked at cats, it was a similar case here. So 22% of female cats were pre-altered versus 23% of male cats. So when we ended in 2023. So those numbers have decreased over time, but again, male cats are more likely to be spay neutered versus female, just slightly. But it is important here to target that we do need to target getting females spayed. They're the ones that are reproducing. They're the ones that are having the kittens. So really having that emphasis be on female cats is so critically important. And then a conclusion. So with this report, we understand it's like, okay, we're seeing these decreases over time. What are the big conclusions of this? We do note that pre-altered animals move through the shelters faster than those that are not pre-altered, which reduces their length of stay. Altered intake rates are declining across all species over the years, and continue to see steady increases or steady decreases over the years. And then, as Dr. Levy mentioned, access to services is the key to underlying issues. So access to service, access to care out in the community is impacting like what we're seeing with animals that are entering the shelters. And so the big question now, where do we go from here? And so we wanted to bring back in Stephanie, and we're going to have a bit of a Q&A with Dr. Levy to talk about just what are some of the big questions because it's like a lot of information that we've looked at today. It's like, oh my gosh, where do we even start? What do we do from here? So we wanted to just have a little bit of a dialogue about where do we go from here? What is next? So go ahead, Stephanie.
Sure. So we have a lot of questions that have come in through Q&A, and we had some that were submitted in advance. So we'll start off with one that I know you've spoken about, Dr. Levy, is there has been some suggestion that we should focus spay neuter efforts on males to get a bigger impact overall. Is that accurate? And where do you stand on that?
For population management, this occurs in the wild as well as, with other species, as well as with cats and dogs. And we can take information from internationally where there's a lot of community neutering of free roaming animals. It really comes down to the point that only the females matter for reproduction. Now, if you have a pair of dogs in a home and they don't go outside, yes, that male might, impregnate the female. But if there really isn't any way in the free roaming community to neuter enough males to prevent females from getting pregnant. There's always one looking, and the females will find them. And so when we have to choose, who do you do a spay or a neuter? Always pick the spay for most animals. Now in cats, we also neuter the males. One, because it's super easy, and when you trap them, you can't like pick and choose, but also because they're obnoxious and they spray and they're hard to live with in a neighborhood. So male cats get neutered just partly just because they're rotten if they're intact. But for population control, that doesn't matter. If we're talking about the animals at risk for coming into shelters, we really need to be focusing on the females. And that's rough because it's a much harder surgery. And especially in the big dogs, it actually is very tiring for the surgeons and they can get joint pain and other problems. So we do have a problem with how many big dogs a single surgeon can do in a day, even if they have time.
And a lot of times, shelters and spay neuter clinics are devoting a lot of resources to investing in community spay neuter, and it can feel like it's a drop in the bucket and hard to know what is the minimum enough for it to make it worth it. Where's our point of diminishing returns? Can you talk about how a shelter or a clinic could set those goals that would actually make a difference?
Yeah, that's another tough question. And you'll see a lot of numbers that it's like vaccination. You do 70% of the animals and like magic, their population will be controlled. And there actually is not data for that to support that. So I think if you want to have a lofty goal, like that's a big one if you're doing large populations, but we know that you probably have to do more than 70%, and then you have to maintain it because that 30% that's intact, especially with cats, they're going to reproduce and overwhelm the neutered ones right away. So that's why we go for whole colony clean out with spay neuter, is to prevent it from recurring, but you do have to manage it. So it's to control the population in the field is probably more than anyone can do, at least here in the South, where we do not have a harsh winter to help with deplete the weak ones that are born over the winter. Like everybody survives. And so I think when you're saying, do I do the animals in my shelter? Do I do it for low income people? Do I try to understand who is most at risk for reproducing? And of those, what subset is most at risk for being a problem or having a welfare concern? So who is most at risk for reproducing are going to be free roaming animals. And then who is the biggest problem is big dogs and free roaming cats in general, and females for both. Like no, if the little fluffies go out and have litters, that's usually not a problem for a shelter. There will be adopters who want those animals. It's the big dogs with the big litters that are producing dogs that people either can't or don't want to adopt at this time.
And similarly to that, the SAC data shows, and a lot of people feel it on this webinar, that the shelter system is on fire right now. There's very few resources, ever dwindling. There's more need, more animals coming in, more animals staying longer. If you were running a shelter med program at a shelter, where do you even start with knowing that you can't do it all? How can you have the most impact?
Yeah, and so that comes back to who are we most responsible for? In 2019, things were going so well, like shelters were running well. We were starting to build all these community programs so animals didn't have to come to shelters, supporting animals in the home, self-rehoming. It was looking really good, like we were on the right track to make a difference for animals and their families. And now it's just such a setback and seems to be getting worse, and the public still is demanding that same level of accomplishment, which is not possible. And so what I would say is your first obligation is to the animals in your care, like any owner. If you have animals in your care, you have to keep them healthy and safe and control their stress and try and get them into a better situation. So sometimes that is why some public clinics have, or some shelters have stopped their public clinics, which they didn't do lightly. And then even within the animals in your care, how do you know what to start on first when your shelter's on fire? Do you just are you just running out, getting animals out of the building? You're saying some have to stay in the fire because we have rules that they have to be neutered before they can leave the fire. So I think this is really where your shelter data comes in and can really tell the story of where you focus when you cannot do it all. So if you're not using shelter software now, I highly recommend it. There's a variety of programs to select from, and there's some that are like almost free and some that are quite affordable and quite flexible. So get that shelter data and get it tuned up so that you are capturing the information you need about different categories of animals. Then you can look and dig down in that and say, who's staying the longest? Who's likely to get sick? Who is sitting around here that can't even be adopted because they're an underage kitten and really should be in a foster home? So your shelter data will really drive a lot of your decisions, because not sometimes the data like, oh, I thought we're doing really good on our spay list, but turns out it's running late. So that's very helpful to control length of stay and identify the bottlenecks. There are also consultants available across the country that can come in, outside eyes, look at your situation and point to your lowest hanging fruit to get started. But since we're talking about spay neuter here, one of the most controversial topics is neuter before adoption. And I always start by saying, I'm a huge believer in neuter before adoption. But if the shelter is on fire, I'm going to take that animal out, put it in a safe place with a neuter contract. And I understand that not all of those will be honored, but the proportion of those who are likely to reproduce is much lower than the proportion of animals that haven't even come into the shelter. They're just running around the street, or they're community cats having kittens everywhere. And so by holding these animals for a longer length of stay so we can get them neutered first, we are stopping other animals that need that life-saving care to come into our rescues and shelters. So I think we're at the point, like, it's very clear we are not going to turn a corner where everything's going to turn good. We need to buckle up and say, how do we help the animals in the fire, and make decisions we wouldn't have made in the past.
So we've seen in a lot of the data that we've taken quite a big fall from where we were prior to the pandemic. Is there any estimate of how long it'll take to get back to where we need to be, or where even we were before?
We were talking about this before the meeting, and it's like, I don't see sunlight. And I hate to be like that, because being depressing can like just cause inertia, and that we cannot afford that right now. So again, we need to be very tactical. I do not see veterinary workforce recover in any time soon, like years. So we have to make decisions that are effective, knowing that. And so so what I see is there's a lot of burned out vets from shelter and from private practice, and a lot of them are going into relief work because they can control their own schedules. And there's some really good spay neuter vets in the relief work pool. So maybe bringing them into our shelters to help us spay and neuter, or at least to get caught up with backlogs if they've developed. There's also groups like Bissell Pet Foundation. There's the B Spay Neuter Consulting Group, and some others that will come in and help you get caught up with the surgery that you have, or have a public clinic for you on a day that you're off and the clinic is available. And so really looking for those national resources at this time, the funders to step up and help us catch up, and then again have those hard conversations about who we are going to put those rare surgery appointments filled with, and when. So quickly, and our highest risk animals need to take those appointments. There are some new vet schools opening, like 10 or 12. So maybe in a decade, we will have a higher number of vets coming out that are ready to do this work, but it is not next year.
You had asked me to remind you to talk about procedure clinics. So can you tell us more about those?
This is a new thing. It's filling a really good niche, and I call them procedure clinics, but they all have different names. So a lot of people now, they find themselves at an emergency clinic with a one-time problem, like a pyometra, dystocia, dog ate a foreign body, cat is obstructed, needs a PU. And in the emergency clinic, that might be $10,000 or $15,000. And there are very few of us on this call who really could pull that money out without like harming our families, or maybe couldn't do it at all. And so veterinarians they're not specialists. There's veterinarians that love surgery, and they are really good at it. They're starting to open up their own clinics that I call procedure clinics. The only thing they do is referrals for these kinds of surgeries. It's in and out, same day. They're not hospitalizing really sick animals, but they'll do a pyometra or dystocia or a PU during daytime hours. And so most of these emergencies can be stabilized overnight to go to the procedure clinic the next day. And many of them, the prices are, it's a fixed rate package and they're posted on the internet. And so on the clinic site, it'll say, a foreign body, $2,000 for a dog, 1,800 for a cat, or whatever. And I think that's a real unmet needs that some very clever veterinarians are starting to put together. So I will look up some and I will pass those links along, and then that can be included in the links that are shared.
Great. Do you have any thoughts on how chemical sterilization can be implemented to help mitigate some of these gaps?
Oh my gosh, wouldn't that change everything? If we could have non-surgical contraception, even if it wasn't permanent, permanent would be great, but if you could buy a couple of years, it would really help us, because imagine being able to send a technician out with some loaded syringes and they trap a cat and just like poke it through the trap, let it go. We're still struggling with how do you get the ear tip done, but that's this minor problem that we could really scale up sterilization and population control. I really think we might not get there and make significant progress until the scientists that are working on this, and they are, reach that. But it is a few years away still. There's one promising product for cats that they're working on. If you're interested in this topic, go to the website for the Alliance for Contraception in Cats and Dogs, and they keep up with all of the science and post the papers there, and there's summaries on all the products that are available. In the US at this time, there technically is not any products for non-surgical contraception. However, people are using like the hormone implants that you can get for ferrets and using them in some animals, or importing things in that are not FDA approved. We did have that testicular injection for a while. It was called Zuterin or Nutersol, and it did work for males. We used it in Florida and the Galapagos, but it is now off the market because it didn't sell enough. And so we are back to surgery for now being the only option that really is as possible. There is a drug called megestryl acetate that you can give weekly to feral cats in their food and keep the females out of heat. And if you have a kind of colony that eats on a regular basis, and you can make sure that the cats eat their plate, that has worked for some caregivers.
Great. I know we talked about it and we've been throwing a lot of information at people, and there's some questions in the chat. Can you just repeat in the order that you think is the highest priority, whether it's age or species or gender or, small, fluffy, whatever, what shelters should start in addition to their own data and what's staying the longest or what's coming in the most into their shelter? What should they prioritize when it comes to spay neuter?
Yeah, I really look at, we know that females are the ones that reproduce, so really heavily weighting on them when we can. And then the big dogs are causing a problem everywhere. So big dogs, and especially regionally, what the breeds are is a problem. Like here in Florida, I would say the bully breeds are really the dominant breed that we see. There's some Malinois and some other breeds, but it's mostly the bullies. I went to California and they have Huskies and Shepherds. It was totally like weird cultural shock to me. So if you are trying to distribute a very rare resource, look at what's coming into your organization. That's a problem that people don't want. And then with cats, it's always the community cats because they're always breeding, and most of those kittens will die. Like there's a lot of suffering in community cats. Half to 3/4 of them will die if they are born in the wild. So that, I think that is a target for us. Plus they're easy to do. So yay for that. So what I would do now, how can you leverage that? So you maybe have a few subsidized spots for free, or you can have coupons to go to the local vet, or your pricing structure just might support that. So what I would say right now, pricing structure is related to how hard the surgery is. Big dog costs more than a small dog. I would reverse that. I would say, let's try to make the big dog surgery as cheap as possible so we can get them in, and then let the little dogs subsidize the big dogs. So charge more for the little ones and charge more for males than for females.
Great. Any other thoughts to what we need to do as an industry, sheltering industry, private practice, vet schools, anything else, laws, legislation that we should be talking about or considering, or that even people on this call could start to get involved with?
So on the community level, I think we need to get our elected officials on board with subsidizing this work. And a lot of times that could be like adding $1 to a license fee, or somehow targeting money to spay neuter so that we can get ahead of this. We are right now drinking from a fire hose. That is the result of the problem. We are not working upstream to solve the problem. Now that's hard because the economy is not going in the right direction. Municipal governments are also tight, and a lot of people don't think animals should be getting the money when people are suffering too. But we need to build that political clout with our elected officials. And then laws can be tricky. I've not seen, I know it's always popular to say, well, let's just make a law, everybody has to be spayed and neutered, and voila, be fixed. And that really hasn't worked anywhere. And it actually can make criminals out of people that love their pets and either didn't know or can't access veterinary care. So in my experience is, if you open the door and make the service available, more people will come to you than you can possibly handle. Like, you don't need to coerce people. Now, I know there's a few times, like, maybe there's the hoarding case, or, a breeder that's really bad or whatever. The laws are for that. But just to take families and say, you're now breaking the law and we're going to take your animal away from you, or we're going to charge money that you don't have, is not the right approach. Let's just remove all the barriers, shape the path, and we will be overbooked all of the time.
Great. And lastly, before we kick it back over to Tori, are there any other communities or organizations that you know of that things are working really well when it comes to tackling this challenge?
So one that comes to mind that I'm very familiar with and we brag about is our local Operation Catnip TNR program. It started way back in 1998 with a few volunteers, still largely a volunteer organization. All it does is TNR, and has a little working cat program. But it also noticed that, like, we're not really excited about doing TNR on kittens because we know a lot of them won't make it. So they developed a kitten shelter diversion program, which is, I really would like to spread it to more shelters and rescue groups. So what it means, people they find a litter of kittens, they want to bring them to the shelter, and the shelter's like, we can't take them, but Operation Catnip will help you. And what Catnip does is says, we will provide all the veterinary care for free. You raise them up a few more weeks until they're ready to be spayed and neutered. We do that for you too, and then you get them adopted. And it isn't the answer that people wanted. They wanted to save the kittens and give them away. And we're like, you got a couple of weeks of work here, but we're here for you. And it last year, they over 9,000 surgeries overall in this small community, and then 1,200 of those were kitten shelter diversion programs. Did not go to the shelter, did not go to a rescue. They're not in a foster program. They're being kept by the person that found them, and that really expands our network, because they weren't coming. They're not one of our foster homes, and taking up one of those, and they all are not bringing them to the shelter. And they have friends that, like, we're never thinking about adopting a pet. And so we just expanded the world that it might see a cute kitten and take it from us. So we're really pleased with that. I will say the surprise for those who have done this program is how many cats need some medical intervention. And then I'm not surprised, because, like, well, half or three-quarters die. So we're finding them in that stage. So be prepared for sick cats and injured cats. Might need to take out an eye or a leg or something along the way to get them better. Plan on that. But it really is a very effective way to get neutered cats into homes without burdening our other systems.
Great, thank you. Everyone, please continue to put questions in the chat, and I'm going to kick it over to Tori.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, that was all amazing. So thank you all so much, by the way, for putting all of these questions in the chat. Obviously, like, we need to continue this conversation. It's a very, very interesting one, very, very much needed at this time. So, I mean, we can't thank you enough for, one, being here today, and two, very, like, contributing to this conversation in the ways that you have. But we wanted to close just very quickly on some things that are working. So Stephanie just asked Dr. Levy, like, if there's some examples, and we reached out to the amazing people over at Spay Neuter Network in Dallas, Texas. And I saw Jamie Case a little bit ago mention collaboration. And I actually attended a session at a conference with Spay Neuter Network, and it was about this topic. It was about how they're collaborating with their shelters, with their rescues, with their funders in the community, and just really working together to address spay neuter in the Dallas area and around there. And so I asked her, I said, what are you finding that's working really well for you right now? Just to give you a background too on them, they have 4 locations where they do spay neuter clinics. They also have a mobile spay neuter program and a transport program that we're going to talk about in a minute. And they provide services to 16 counties in and around Dallas for free or affordable spay neuter and essential wellness for families and their pets. They served 58,000 pets in 2024 with 30,000 dogs and cats receiving spay neuter surgery. So they're doing a lot of work there in Dallas. But some of the things that they mentioned that's working really well, they developed a mentorship program that I'm actually going to put in the chat about what that is involved in that mentorship program, where new vets complete a 3-day intensive high quality, high volume. Is it high quality or high quantity?
Quality.
Quality, thank you. I just want to make sure I didn't hit a typo. Ongoing cohort-based development with peer support. Sorry, getting loopy after talking for an hour. Graduates now scheduling solo surgery days, and they have their veterinary mentorship program, which I thought was so interesting. Another thing that they are doing is an externship program with access to care focused externships, collaboration with local shelters, and full service practices, which is so important for vet students to see both of those practices and how they're different. Designed to expose vet students to real world community needs, so they're seeing everything that they need to see. And for recruitment and retention of veterinarians, they increased focus on competitive pay for veterinarians and vet techs and did clinic upgrades to improve working environments to attract talent. And one of my favorite things they mentioned was their transport program. So they have strategic transport from rural and underserved zip codes in and around the Dallas area. Combines mobile intake with in-clinic surgery delivery. And in the past year, they transported 5,500 pets to clinics to receive services, which was just absolutely amazing. Their website is in the chat. Feel free to check them out. I think they're doing such great work. And I asked Jordan, the executive director there, I said, can you please give me an inspirational quote for the things for, looking at this data, like what are some things that you take from it that you're just like, okay, this is what we do. So she said the data is finally catching up to what we've intuitively known for years. It not only validates our experience, but also empowers us to address the challenge head on because innovation thrives in the face of adversity, which I loved that. And lastly, if you have some tips and tricks of things that are working well in your community, we would love to hear them. Feel free to put those in the chat. It's something that's working great. Or like links to programs that you've started, any data that you have from those programs, feel free to drop those in the chat. We have just a few minutes left. We would love to hear them, and ending on an inspirational high note. These are some resources as well. They're in the altered status report, but I love all of these because they provide, if you put your zip code in, you can see where there are low cost services, food resources, whatever it is that pet owners need. Put these on your websites. Give these out to pet owners if they're reaching out maybe about owner surrenders or reaching out asking for services. Give them these resources. They're so great. They'll be able to help pet owners find and access resources in their neighborhoods. And then lastly, if you are an organization that is not contributing data to Shelter Animals Count, we would love for you to be a part of what we are doing, the work that we're doing here. Your data matters. It helps us tell stories like this. We would not be able to put this report out without data from our organizations. We are so, so grateful to all of you who contribute data. And if you are not, we would love to have your support. And on our website, you can see trends and analysis from 14,000 organizations all across the country, shelters, rescues. If you are sheltering animals, you can contribute data to us as well as community services. We have our community services dashboard. So if you're an organization that provides services to pets in your community, you can also submit data through our community services dashboard. We have member exclusive dashboards. So if you are a contributing member, there are behind the scenes dashboards that you will have access to. There are organization type comparison dashboards, as well as just being able to, as Dr. Levy mentioned, having that data and looking at your data and analyzing it is so critically important. We provide these great resources behind the scenes. And we also put out our annual and mid-year report. So we have our 2024 report that is available on our website, and our mid-year report is coming soon for 2025, coming very soon. We're excited to be releasing that very soon. We're also working on some additional data reports similar to the altered status report that we'll be putting out this year. So be on the lookout for that. If you're not following us on social media, please do. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Substack now that you can follow us on Substack as well as, and you can sign up for our Sack Bites newsletter where we're putting out a lot of this information. We have our Data Basics workbook powered by Hill's Pet Nutrition, where this is great resource if you are just getting started on submitting data, you maybe have questions on how to do it. This is a great resource to start with. It's available on our website. We'll put the link in the recap with the recording of this. And with that, we're here at 3 o'clock. I want to thank you all so much for being here today. We are so grateful for you being here, being part of this conversation. We will be releasing the recording. We'll get it out to everybody as quick as we can and submitting all those links as well in there so that you have those. And then lastly, here's our email. If you have any follow-up questions, if you need anything from us in the SAC team, please reach out. Shout out to our data team for putting this report together. It was so critically important. We're so proud of them. And thank you all so much for being here today. Have a great day, everyone.
Yeah.